Thank you very much, Michael. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys again today. This is our webinar number 4 with the MEP, and today I'm joined by Lisa Kelley from Floating Interest. Lisa and I work together on many projects and collaborate with our clients. She has a wealth of knowledge, and we'll get into that in a minute. I'm going to share my screen, so if someone could please let me know that you can see my screen, that would be excellent.
I see
you need to put it in presentation mode, please.
Yep, it's
perfect.
Okay, perfect. All right. So our topic today is building a supply chain reduction pipeline. So this is a topic that I think is near and dear to many of us because many of us have had challenges around cost and continue to have challenges around cost, especially in this, sort of COVID environment that we're in. So Lisa and I are going to take a crack at sharing our perspectives and what we think works and what we find helpful as we think about building a pipeline, supply chain cost reduction pipeline. Before I get into that, let me take a minute and introduce ourselves. So Lisa is Managing Director of Floating Interest Corporation. She's got 30 plus years of manufacturing, supply chain, and finance. She's got a wealth of background developing solutions not only domestically, but also internationally, and working with companies and helping them ramp up their production as well as decrease costs. So we're going to get into that in a lot more detail in a few minutes. Myself, my name is Seema Phull, and I've got over 25 years of experience with transformation, supply chain transformation. I focus specifically on how do you align processes, organizational structures with the right technology to enable rapid results. We focus on transformation, both supply chain transformation as well as digital transformation. Most recently, I served as a chief transformation officer for one of our clients and helping them improve their EBITDA significantly, upwards of about 50%, along with increasing their inventory turns. So what we also work with PE firms and their portfolio companies in helping them create value with their purchases, with their transactions, and then obviously help to improve their portfolio company performance. So that's a little bit about Lisa and myself. Lisa, would you like to say hi before we go into a little bit more detail?
Good morning, everybody. Happy to be here.
Great. All right, so we're promised that Lisa and I are not going to bore you with lots of PowerPoints. We do have a few PowerPoints, but we're going to try and keep this more of a conversation because I'm sure that with all these Zoom meetings, most of us are probably tired of lots of slides. So having said that, let me share another slide with you. So this is a list of the clients that we work with. As you can see, we've got both mix of small, mid-size, as well as large clients, and they span various industries, high-tech industry, aerospace, as well as financial services and automotive and so on. So the point being that the content that we're going to share with you is not specific to any one industry or any one specific size of company. They're really applicable across multiple verticals as well as sizes. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the deck. So let's get it started. So Lisa, let's start with talking about how supply chain is related to financial performance and financial statements. I think that's probably the best way to kind of get started on this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone as part of the supply chain professionals working through their supply chain really does have an impact on the financial performance of the organization. And in fact, supply chain professionals should be partnered with the finance team as well as many of the other teams within the organization. But as a supply chain professional, you have a great touch into the financials from both the income statement side of it as well as the balance sheet. So if you think about it, the time that inventory is purchased and even before it arrives, you should have some input into it. If you think about the terms of the purchase, and when you think about terms, is when does title pass? That's important because when title passes, it becomes your inventory and hits the balance sheet. When inventory arrives, now it's on your shelf, and you don't want it to be sitting on the shelf for a long time. Again, that's increased of the inventory, but you want to turn it into cash. You want to move the inventory as quickly as possible. So, if you can work with your teams to have the inventory arrive kind of just in time, but you want to have a little buffer, and then be able to move it through the manufacturing process as quickly as possible, so that the time that you have the inventory versus the time it takes for you for your payment terms, you kind of try to have that cash flow net to perhaps zero, right? Don't have the inventory any longer than you have to pay for it. Convert it into manufactured good. Also, at the beginning of part of the process, think about, as the material is coming in, who owns that cost of that freight? And now, you touch, as supply chain, you're touching the income statement. You've got the cost of the inbound freight. It may be something that you control, or that the supplier is managing the freight. You want to take a look at that. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But you've got the inbound freight costs. That is part of your responsibility as a supply chain professional to understand that cost. Then it goes into the manufacturing process. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the costs in the manufacturing and how to think through some potential cost reductions. As it goes through, now it's ready for outbound. You've got the shipping costs outbound, you've got the packaging, and there's costs there that you should be kind of thinking about and managing. That's all hitting the income statement. Once it is sent out of your warehouse and delivered to whomever your customer is, maybe it's a consumer directly, or maybe it's through another business, B2B. Think about that shipping and making sure that you've shipped directly to the order, right? You don't want any errors, you want accuracy. If there's any errors, again, you may be incurring more costs, and that's going to show up on your income statement. Maybe you have to bring that package back, so you've got additional costs there. Maybe you have to send out an additional package because you missed putting something in that first shipment. So managing through all those costs, it's directly tied to your financial performance. And if the customer gets what they want first time, fully accurate, that's going to turn into cash much quicker, right? They're not going to pay a bill if they didn't get exactly what they wanted. So again, that's a cash flow. So when you think about the whole cash conversion cycle, it's, how many days do you have your inventory, and how long does it take you to convert that to cash? And so when you think about your supply chain, you can think about every little piece. You can pick apart with your financial leader, you can pick apart the income statement and say, here's what you can manage and have an impact on. You can look at the balance sheet and say, here's what you can have an impact on. And frankly, you should be almost ready to kind of raise your hand and say, let me help the financial performance, and sign up for some goals to help the financial performance, and let it be part of your performance measurements. So there's a lot of bits and pieces there. And we'll talk about some of those in a little bit more detail as we go on, and how the process that you can manage can have that impact. I'll pass that to Seema to talk about some processes.
All right, thank you very much. All right, so, as Lisa mentioned, there's, the financials, the connection between supply chain and financial statements. So I'm going to take a step back and really look at it from a process perspective, and supply chain processes and costs, and really where we see opportunities for these costs to either increase or decrease depending on how they're managed. So let's talk about the planning process. So as we all know, supply chain has core process of plan, source, make, deliver, make/execute, and return. And so what we're seeing is that planning is actually a very, very intricate process that allows an organization to either introduce cost or reduce cost. So if you think about it from the perspective of your forecast error has direct correlation to inventory. Okay, so if you have a lot of volatility, if you have a lot of forecast error, you're going to end up trying to buffer that error by reducing inventory. By increasing inventory. Another aspect is manufacturing cycle time. So if your manufacturing cycle time is very long and your forecast error is high, well, directly relates to having additional cost than what you need. So the best way to battle that is take that, if you have a forecast error, first of all, I am convinced based on the 20 plus years of doing this, that most of us don't look at forecast ability enough. We have, when we peel that back, most of our products do have forecastable levels, and that allows us to better get a better handle on what the demand will be, and therefore stage the inventory at the right level of the bill of material. If you cannot do that, if your plan or your forecast is just so volatile because of the industry, because of the customer that you're working with, the next lever to pull is manufacturing cycle time. So for example, if our manufacturing cycle time is 10 days, you at least got to carry 10 days of inventory, right? But if you take that 10 days, now reduce it to 2 days, you've directly now reduced the need for inventory from 10 to 2. And that's really something that we focus on with our clients to make sure that they understand that correlation and that connection. Let's move on to sourcing. Our friends in sourcing do a great job of finding us the right suppliers with the right quality and so on. However, we don't always have the perfect plan that we're sharing with them. And the suppliers don't have perfect supply chain as much as we like to maybe close our eyes and hope that they do when we sign those long-term agreements. However, the reality is they don't. So there's always volatility in the plan that we send to our sourcing partners. And there's always volatility in the supplier lead time, supplier quality, and reliability. All of those together introduce risk in a supply chain, and that risk translates into cost. So especially in the current environment with COVID and with where we are globally, there is a lot of risk in the supply chain. And so being able to measure the resilience of your supplier is a key aspect of measuring cost and also controlling cost. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail as well. Now let's talk about the make function, which is the manufacturing itself. Production schedule attainment, manufacturing yields, labor rates, all of those elements introduce cost. And if they're not managed properly, you will have cost in your supply chain more than you would like. So those are the levers to pull to try to reduce cost in the make function. There's also other costs that are associated with the manufacturing piece, like for example, your footprint. How much space do you have? How much utilization do you have of that footprint? What are the fixed costs associated with your infrastructure, with machining, and so on? Those are other aspects that we look at when we build a cost pipeline. Now, the probably one of the most obvious places that we look at from a cost perspective is the deliver process. So deliver is all about distribution, transportation, as Lisa just mentioned in the previous discussion, that transportation costs, cost of error in your invoicing, cost of error in your bill of lading, all of that translates into increased costs in a supply chain. So managing those aspects, making sure that you've got errors out of those processes and you've got the lean methodology in place to manage those is very, very important. Now, in the recent years, we've also been dealing with increase in tariffs, international tariffs, increase in import taxes and so on. All of those add costs. And many times, when clients are looking at their supply chain cost, it's almost like, well, X percentage of my sales has to go to distribution and transportation. So I'm just going to kind of let somebody else worry about it and just, put that plug in as a cost. What I would ask you guys to think about is, let's actually tear that down and let's understand the components of the distribution and transportation costs and ask ourselves, could we do this differently? Especially in the mid-tier clients and the mid-sized companies, because there are lots of opportunities with third parties. There's lots of opportunities for outsourcing that didn't exist, in the past. So really think about that aspect of your supply chain and see where you can create those opportunities to reduce cost in the supply chain. And then the last piece is the return, the service. Whether we like it or not, we all have returns. And if you think about the returns, there was a statistic I read that said 8 to 15% of companies' top line can be eroded by the cost of returns. I mean, that's significant. That's huge in terms of, especially for some of the regulated industries where you can't just return that part and then put it back on the shelf, right? That part is no longer usable. It needs to be torn down, it needs to be dispositioned properly, and so on. So the RMA cost, the cost of processing a return materials authorization, can be 2 to 3 times more of the process to manage the original shipment. And again, that's a huge category of cost that that we encourage companies to look at when they're trying to think about building a cost reduction pipeline. Okay. Now, what's complex is all of these processes are not linear. They're not simple. They all are, you know, if you look at the picture on the right, they all are very much overlapping, and they have connections with each other. And so what that does is it allows you to, what it does, it creates a opaque environment that you need to make sure that you implement some transparency too. And that transparency has to result with process improvement of actually managing the cost infrastructure, as well as with the right visibility capability. Okay.
Seema, I need to ask for questions in the chat function, and we have a question on that side. Would you like to save the questions till the end?
You know what? I think it might make sense to save it till the end, just because then we can, you know, others might come up, other questions might come up as we're going through, if it's okay with you.
Absolutely. Please, anybody with questions, put it in the chat and we'll address it at the end of the presentation. Thank you, Seema.
Yeah, we're going to leave plenty of time for those questions. Okay. Lisa, did you want to say anything before I move on to the next topic?
No, I was just going to mention that there was that question in the chat room. So
okay. Okay, sounds great. So, you know, it's really interesting. You know, with consulting, you kind of you have the benefit of taking a bird's eye view on most of these things, because we're not bogged down with the day-to-day operations of a company. So I feel fortunate in the work that we do, that we're able to provide our clients with sort of this clear perspective on how to go about creating a cost reduction pipeline. And this is an approach that we've taken that with many of our clients, and it works very well. And we call, you know, it has 4 specific steps. So it's diagnose, design, deconstruct, and deploy. The first step is really taking those processes that I've just talked about, planning, source, make, deliver, service, and understanding the organizational capability, okay? And that is saying, where am I today? And what do I have the capability to do? So for example, do I have the organizational structure to even look at where I have leakage in my procurement process? Do I have the visibility that I need to be able to understand what percentage of my spend is optimized versus is not? Okay, so I had a client in the recent past that had put long time agreements with some of their clients. However, they had 20 plus factories. Each of the factory was actually buying based on the suppliers that they had relationship with. And so when we, you know, but they had no way to track were the lead time, were the long LTAs being used for these purchases or not. So that's what I mean by organizational capability. You can put an initiative in place, but if you can't track that it's actually taking hold, you're not going to be any further along. So the first step is understanding the organizational capability in each one of those areas. Then the second step is design. So this is designing an integrated flow and system. So as I mentioned, these processes are not linear, and they're not processes that kind of run in their own swim lane. Although we like to think about processes in the swim lanes, but the fact of the matter is we cross over those swim lanes every single day in almost every action that we do. So you have to create that integrated flow for your business, for your company, understanding that, and also have to reimagine each area with the customer in mind. And I think that's really important as we come out of the COVID situation here, hopefully very quickly and very soon. We really have to think about how have our customers changed? How have our expectations changed from our manufacturing? How have our expectations changed from our suppliers? How have our suppliers changed their expectations of us? That reimagination is the design piece, because that's really important. So think about the design as an integrated flow, plus as a reimagined relationship, as a journey that we're moving forward with. And then the third step is deconstruct. So deconstruct means the only way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time, right? We've heard that old adage over and over again. And the way to think about that is use those agile sprints of capabilities to implement those big changes that you want to implement. So for example, you might say, here's my journey that I want to have, reimagined journey for interfacing with my distributors. Okay, create a two-week sprint. What are you going to get up and running in those 2 weeks? Create sprint number 2, another 2 weeks. What are you going to get up and running? And then go test them, right? Go test that capability using that agile methodology versus the old approach where you would have a 3 or 4 month project and then unveil that to the organization and then only to have resistance from an adoption perspective. So deconstructing it into sprints allows you to get rapid feedback, and it also allows you to drive adoption in real time with your organization, okay? The fourth step of this approach is deploy. So make sure that you're thinking about deployment and very early on in your design stages. And this is where change enablement comes into play. If you don't have a good process and a team that represents each of these functions and that is involved in setting the policies, that is involved in designing the processes and selecting the technology, you're not going to make headways that you want to make with getting this implemented and in the DNA of the organization. And make sure you have clear markers for success for each one of those process areas. So how does planning know they've been successful? How does sourcing know they've been successful? So on and so forth. Okay. So I've said a lot, so I'm going to just take a little bit of a pause and give Lisa an opportunity to really share with us from her perspective, especially from her finance background, where are some hidden cost categories, because we know they exist and they typically show up at AOP or typically show up at the end of the year when those categories have actually come to fruition. And we're sort of like saying, wait a minute, why didn't I think about that when I was about putting my budget together? So Lisa, why don't you take us through some of the cost categories that you see as important issues?
Great, thank you, Seema. So, when you think about the supply chain process, it really does start with before you even begin. It starts with the design of your product. And there's costs in there to manage that maybe you're not thinking about. When you're developing your product and you're designing the product, you're designing it with a purpose and a capability in mind and the demand that the market has for it. However, through that design process, you should also be thinking about designing for production, designing for the manufacturing process. So that when you think of the components that are within that product, there is times that components go on allocation. Well, in the design process, think about, are there comparable or interchangeable components? Don't rely on just one supplier for a component. So design for the interchangeable component will allow you to not be tied to a cost or to a particular supplier. Also, think about when you're doing the design, think about the whole package itself. If you're going to have some molded components in there, is there flexibility that can adapt to the demands and the supply? Different types of plastics, different types of metals, can they be built into that design to allow for a shift in availability of the product? Also, think about in the design, there may be shifting demand. Maybe a customer or a market wants something a little bit different. Design for that initially. Don't forget about that, because then when you have to go back and do a redesign, those are costs. And as Seema said, those are some of the hidden costs that you want to avoid. You also want to make the product kind of upgradable, adaptable for the next version. So have that in mind. You may not know what that is going to be demanded from the customer in the future, but plan for something and design for that. That will save you costs in the long run. Also, when you think about the manufacturing process and the whole supply chain process, don't think that every product should go down the same process. Some products that are regulated are going to require a lot more different processes, and they're costly. It may be some additional paperwork, administration, certifications. You may have to have another, just a little loop in the process to go through those. And a lot of times in manufacturing, you think about that you think about, let's do everything all the same. Let's conform, because standard processes then make it so much easier to be consistent in the output. So you really got to run through that analysis. Does it make it more consistent? And I'm just turning up my volume because I got a message here. Hopefully that's a little bit better. All right. Great. Thank you for the feedback. So when you have a process, look at the products. Sometimes it will be better and more cost efficient to run everything through the whole regulated process, but other times not. So don't assume a consistent conforming process is always going to be cheaper. When you think about products, are you shipping it to a domestic ship-to location or international? Again, same thing here. International process with all of the bill of ladings and the tariffs and the additional trade compliance roles that have to take place for international, don't send a domestic shipment through that same process unless you have actually reviewed it and determined, yeah, you know what, that little bit of extra step, it is not costing us, so we'll run it through. But run that analysis, because there are going to be hidden costs in there if you don't think about the difference of domestic ship to or international. Another area is in the packaging. Each product may require a different packaging. Maybe you could use the same packaging, but you'd be surprised if you really dig into it, how much difference that can make in your costs. The type of packaging, the rigidity of the packaging, where is it going to, who's the carrier? Each carrier may have different dimension and weight specifications that carry different costs. You may choose a carrier that is going to ship kind of locally. All right, maybe you don't have to have as much of rigidity in that packaging. Maybe they have certain sizes. If you don't ship over to the East Coast, maybe a conformed size is cheaper, even though there's air in there. How do you figure out how to get some of that air that you're shipping reduced? So think about that packaging. If you're going to ship internationally, that market may look to a certain type of packaging themselves. And, you know, we're also very much into the green and sustainability. So think through some of those costs that you come with being green and sustainable, or how can you reduce some of that through recycling. So those are hidden costs that come through the processes that you're not really thinking about, but they could be low-hanging fruit actually, and you could save a large amount of money and have a great impact on your financials through all of those. Let's go to the next slide. Another area to think about is, are you using a distributor? And is that distributor an illusion of creating value, or is it actually contributing to value to your organization? You know, I think sometimes companies get used to using a distributor and they just assume, hey, that's the best way to do it. You should test that. Test that theory out every once in a while. Go, what is my distributor doing for me? I used to work in distribution, and we were challenged every day to prove to our customers that we're providing value. And you should challenge your distributor. You know, because really the test is, do you want to go direct, or should you use a distributor? Or maybe a little bit of both, depending on the product, depending on the market, depending where you're shipping it to. You think about the volume of the product that you're shipping. And do you want to, if you go direct, you want to think about, do you want to control the channel? Do you want to control the branding? Do you want to have that one-on-one interaction with your customer? That going direct, if you have very large orders, probably makes a lot of sense. You're not passing on some margin to the distributor, because inevitably you're paying the distributor, right? So make sure that they're providing value, or go direct. when you think about, well, what is the value that the distributor should be giving to me? They can improve your cash flow. They could carry your inventory. And so the minute that you've finished your production process and you ship it to the distributor, that inventory is off your books and cash is in hand, right? So from the beginning, we talked about the cash conversion cycle. That's fantastic. Let them manage your inventory, your finished good, and carry that for you. Also, you know, if there's a lot of ship tos, and it's maybe less in the volume, but a lot of ship to consumers and customers, let the distributor manage that. They're managing the accounts receivable for that. They also should have a lot of data analytics, and they should have systems in place that then you don't have that investment in some of those systems, and they should be providing you that data that will help you further manage. What are the demands of your customers? What are the customers' expectations? So think through that, what you could get from the distributor. Some of the other things that the distributor can do for you is taking some costs off your financials, right? Maybe some of the products require some custom programming, some component programming. They can do that for you. Maybe your product requires some customization in the package. You know, customer X wants certain flyers put in their package. Customer A wants different color in their packaging. They want different promotion. They want it in a different language. Let the distributor manage through all of those little nits that are really important to your customer. But you know, they're so unique and different, and there's so many of them. Let the distributor do that. That's where they can provide value. A distributor can also help manage your shipping costs. They have a lot more volume. Presumably, they should have a lot more volume. So they should be able to reduce the shipping costs that you would have if you did it direct. Now, again, if you have really large orders and a limited ship to addresses, you can probably manage your shipping costs quite well. But if they're smaller orders, a lot more frequent, the volume that the distributor can get through their negotiations with their carriers are going to be a lot better. And they're going to be able to manage the packaging of here's the right dim weights for it. They're going to know that carrier A is better for shipping over into the Northeast. Carrier B is better shipping into the California. Carrier C is, you know, they should have fantastic negotiated pricing for international and know which carrier is better to ship into Asia or Europe. Let them manage through your shipping, especially if you're shipping internationally. And you don't ship into the EU market. Well, you know, we all kind of went through the Brexit, and it's different if you don't go into the UK. You know, let them manage through that. That's a value add to you. And then, like I said in the beginning, they can manage the customer credit risk, right? The accounts receivable. They've already paid you for the inventory. You don't have to worry about all those little customers that are going to say, oh, I'll pay you in 120 days. You know, you can determine better terms with the distributor and let them carry that on their balance sheet. So there's a lot of little hidden risks and costs and cash flow options here for you. But I would say, again, don't just assume because you've been using a distributor that you're getting the value, and test it. Everyone, you know, doesn't hurt on an annual basis. Like, what would be better? And in which instances should we be going direct versus using the distributor? You know, it's fine to go hybrid, depending on the customer, but make sure you test that theory out on a frequent basis and figure out where are the cost savings for you versus costs that are impacting you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Lisa, because one of the things that we see is that often companies will sort of almost like morph into a model where they're managing the customer directly, and then they're trying to flow the order through the distributor. And you kind of step back and you scratch your head. Why are you doing that? Because you're incurring the same cost as a direct model, and you're giving away points to the distributor. So, you know, I've seen that happen quite often, especially in the smaller companies and sort of like the mid-tier sector, you know, $500 million or less companies. So do you have any advice for those smaller folks? Like, is there reason that happens, or, you know, I mean, distributors do business with small companies as well as large companies, right?
Yeah, and I think, you know, the distributor, you know, works hard to add value and, you know, kind of stay sticky with the manufacturer.
Yeah.
But there's times where that doesn't work, and where the customer, you know, because there's a lead time that the customer wants something, and you're literally just finishing the product, getting it, you know, off the end of the line and shipping it. And there's times where you can ship it directly to the customer. Well, the distributor did nothing for you there.
Right.
And in those instances, you got to back off and say, hey, I'm not paying you, Mr. Distributor, for any margin on that. I ship direct, I use my own shipping line, my own shipping freight costs. I work directly with the customer. The customer's not, you know, why should the customer then pay the distributor and the distributor pays, right? And that does happen a lot with distribution. You know, that probably I've seen in some instances, 20% of the shipments are direct from the manufacturer. And, you know, when you start seeing that you're shipping direct, you got to really challenge, like, why am I having a distributor and these on certain products or certain customers? And you need to change the model, because you're losing money. You're just leaking out a cost right there.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I think the key takeaway here, you know, is that going back to that diagnose phase, right? The first phase, don't take anything for granted. Diagnose every single one of these and say, why is this happening? Where's the breakdown in my process? You know, I was going to just take a step back and talk a little bit about standardization versus customization, as well as decoupling or not. Because one of the things that manufacturers, I think, really get focused on is standardize all my processes, or I'm going to be this hyper customized house, job shop type of situation. And I think what I would say is that there's a lot of there's a lot of merit to thinking about somewhere in the middle. Standardized processes across geographies to a certain point where it makes sense, but then keep that customizing for the local usage, so that we don't necessarily have to be we have to meet the customer requirements, but that cost doesn't have to be carried by the entire corporation. It can be carried by that specific geography. I see that quite often in the high-tech industry. So it's something that really to bear in mind, that customization doesn't mean it has to apply to every single part of your business. And that customization really should be thought through in that design phase of the process that we talked about before, saying, as we design this integrated process, which portion of it has to be customized and why? And what's the extra value that I'm creating through that customization? Are you getting bigger margin? Are you getting a bigger market share? Are you getting longer contracts from the customer as a result of it? So make sure that there's value in that customization, because too often we kind of say, well, everybody's doing it, so I'm going to go do it. There's merit in stepping back and taking that into account. Then knowing,
and you know what I'd add on that, Seema, is is there really the value in the customization? Does the customer really want that, or are they asking for it, but just because? You got to kind of challenge that a little bit. Like, what? And if they're getting value out of it because they really have a reason for that customization, great. Understand your costs and processes, but then work with your finance team and your sales team, because not only are you trying to manage the cost, but pass some of that along, because that's value. Apparently the customer wants that customization. They see value in it. So that goes to price as well.
Yeah, so that's a really great point. So when we create that integrated system around pricing and understanding the value of a deal and really pricing out a deal, what we often do is we create sort of this tiger team approach with product marketing, finance, sales, and oh, by the way, don't forget those supply chain people, right? Bring in that supply chain person, and really allows you to get ahead of the game before the salesperson goes and signs a contract. I've been a salesperson. I'm a salesperson through and through. And I'll tell you, we will do and say anything to get the deal, right? And we don't often think about, what is it going to cost my company to get that deal? I get that from my team all the time. What the heck did you just sign us up for? I'm like, yeah, we'll figure it out. So the point here is that you know, I recognize that. So we all have that tendency. So you really want to bring that balance to the front end of the equation versus after the fact. And then the other point that Lisa hit on as well, and I'm going to just reinforce it, is around decoupling processes. So process alignment and synchronization is important, but it's also very, very costly. So make sure you understand that where you actually need that alignment, where you actually need redundancy of processes, and where you can decouple. One of the biggest things I tell my clients is don't be afraid to do a core non-core analysis, right? Don't be afraid to lift the hood and say, how much of this machine do I need to be building myself in-house, or where can I decouple the supply chain and really rely on experts? And am I going to get a lower cost as a result, and better quality and better value? So again, bring in those good old finance people, because, you know, they're going to help you think through that. They're going to help you go through that very quick analysis to say, what is the impact on the bottom line if we were to decouple these processes and have somebody else do it and then bring it back? And how do we then integrate it back into our system? Okay. So I'm mindful of the time, and I want to make sure we do have time for questions. So I'm going to sort of just take this is one of our last slides. I want to bring it back to the so what. Okay, the so what of it is on the left-hand side, these are the costs. Okay, these are the different costs on our financial statements that are impacted by the supply chain. In the middle, this is what we need to do step by step. This is what we need to be thinking about to build on the right side what the targets are. Okay, the targets will vary by customer. The targets will vary by the industry and the size of the company. But I can tell you, and I've given you some sort of ranges. These ranges tend to be what you can get throughout as you build out this cost. Now, there's two phases to the pipeline that I like to talk about. First phase is transformation phase. Then the second phase is continuous improvement. When you're in the transformation phase, you're going to have a very high trajectory of cost savings, and then it starts to sort of level off, and that's expected. That's what it should be. But make sure that the organization knows when the transformation phase starts, when the transformation phase ends. Because I'll pick on my friend Lisa, who's been a CFO before. They love to have year over savings. Well, you gave me 10%. Now you're telling me you're going to give me 6%. Are you telling me you're going to cost 4% more? No, Lisa, last year we were in a transformation phase. So you got the 10%. Now we're going to go to 6% year over year. So you're really still getting savings, but it's not in the same range and magnitude as the years before. So I say that in tongue in cheek because Lisa's my friend, but typically you have that battle with the CFO because of course they're looking out for the, you know, financials of the company and they want to get as much as you can. So don't fall into making those false promises and saying, I'm going to get you all these savings for the next 10 years, because that's not realistic. So really having a mindful approach to when you're in the transformation phase versus when you're continuous improvement. And in many areas, you might go back to transformation because guess what? You bought another company or another company bought you. There was a disruption in technology, disruption in your supply chain. So that takes you back into the transformation phase. So you'll go in and out of those two phases, but make sure that your plan is aligned with where you are with that phase. Okay. So with that, we will go ahead and take questions. Lisa and I are going to, just tag team the questions as they come in. So Michael, I know you had a couple of questions that came in online while we were talking.
Yeah, we got a couple questions and statements in chat and Q&A. So the first one I see here was on your first slide. Ms. Carson asked, in regards to reducing cycle time, what's the best way to handle items with long lead times?
Okay, so the best way to handle that is to have an understanding of what's driving the lead time. And in many cases, you're going to be able to, once you start to do the diagnostic on that lead time, you're going to be able to figure out if there's an opportunity to actually reduce lead time with the supplier. Otherwise, you have to also, in parallel, you also have to do a inventory planning, inventory strategy throughout the bill of material. Because what happens is typically companies will say, I have this $2, I'm going to just say $2 component that has a very long lead time. And therefore, I build this $6 value add sub-assembly, and I need to carry the sub-assembly at the $6 value. No, you need to carry extra inventory on that $2 component, not the $6 sub-assembly. But you wouldn't actually have that insight until you actually lay out the components of that cycle time throughout your factory, as well as throughout your supply chain, and understand those those long lead part numbers and why those long lead part numbers exist. I'll give you an example. When I was with a large aerospace company, what I was able to do was really question when my team would come to me and say, well, these have always been really long lead time products, so we really have no approach. I said, all right, let's look at why they're long lead time. And we actually went and talked to some of those suppliers. Many of the reasons were our designs. Many of the reasons were our volatility in the demand signal. Many of the reasons were our requirements for example, compliance and checks, like, oh, we need to do this check, this check, this check. In many of those areas, we were able to simplify our process. And by simplifying our process, we were able to shorten the lead time. For those areas where it was the design, guess what? You go to the CFO and you say, next year, I'm putting this in my budget to redesign these particular components because this is how much cost savings I'm going to get in my inventory as well as in my overall bottom line. That's what I mean about driving that collaborative process. So Lisa, I don't know if you have anything to add on that answer.
I completely agree. You know, we talked a little bit about, you know, don't just design for capability and purpose, design for manufacturing, design with understanding of how you may need to redesign to accommodate the certain components and have interchangeable components. And, you know, I love what you say, Seema, is, you know, go to the CFO, work with your finance team. I see one of the questions was how best to partner with the finance team. You know, the thing is, you know, I've been CFO. I've also been, you know, VP of global operations and distribution and transportation. You as a supply chain professional, somehow you kind of get forgotten in the process, and you need to be the one that steps up and is very proactive with your CFO. Like, show up at their office, have a standing meeting on a very recurring basis. Be in front of them and talk to them, explaining, here's what you need, here's what you can do. That is the best way to partner. Is, you know, you need to take that first step because for whatever reason, supply chain, we get forgotten about.
Yes.
And, you know, it's like, oh, that just all happens behind the scenes. And, you know, now we either have inventory that we have to deal with, or we have, you know, sales and we have accounts receivable. Be in front of them. And when you encounter a problem, an issue, whether it's, you see that you have extra steps in the process, go to the finance team and talk to them. Hey, you know, we're talking about maybe changing this or changing that. They're going to help you to think through that. And so I just, you know, say partnering with them is, you have to take the first, second, and third step until they stop forgetting about you. You have to invite yourself to meetings until all of a sudden they start inviting you. And you can drive the conversation, drive it by saying, you know what, I can do this. Measure me on it. Be willing to be vulnerable enough to step up and be measured on it.
Absolutely. I think the whole the old adage of, you know, we're the back end of the house, that's not true. We are, you know, I always joke with clients and saying, supply chain people are attractive too. You can put us in front of the customers, you know, we can make you look good. So, and it's actually true, because when I was a practitioner, I would go to customer meetings and I would say, here's the promise that we're making as a supply chain, and therefore we are going to help you look better for your end customer. And so once you get that supply chain to supply chain conversation going, it's amazing how flexible your customer will become. Okay, next slide, please. Next question.
Yeah.
Next question I see is, how do you measure if your distributor is adding value?
Well, that's a great question.
Oh, yeah, I'll take that because I was in distribution and also from the finance side. So way you measure it is you first start and analyze, what are they doing for you? And list it out and know what they're doing for you. There might be some things that they're doing for you that you're not even thinking about. So have the conversation with them, like, hey, you know what? We just want to understand all the steps that you're taking on our behalf. So you kind of have your list, get a list from them, and then tackle it and go, what if we were to do that? What would it cost for us to do that? And it's, you know, it's a math exercise. You figure out what your cost would be. You figure out what the margin is that you're giving to the distributor, and figure out what's better. It's really just a math exercise, but it's strictly dependent on knowing what they're really doing for you. Like sometimes they may say, hey, we're doing this for you. You're like, well, I didn't ask you to do that. And I'm not paying for that. I don't see any value in that. And then the other thing is look at what are you doing that maybe you don't want to do. Maybe it's cost, not, it's increasing your cost. You're like, could I ask them to do that and wonder if I don't have to pay them any more margin? So, lay it all out, do the math, work with your finance team again on this.
Yeah, and I think one thing I would just add is that when you're dealing with distributors, there are salespeople that are very adept at using distributors. So make sure that if you're kind of getting into that distribution game and you're hiring people who understand how to use the distribution as a channel and not as a crutch. And so that's really important because I've seen it used effectively and very ineffectively. So it's a core part of your sales strategy, this distribution model. So make sure you're going in with eyes wide open with that respect.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Seema, because the distributor would say, well, I'm adding channels and exposure, but ask them to prove that to you. Like, well, okay, where and what is that volume that would you have not gotten elsewhere? Today, I think the distributors are really challenged with being able to prove some of the value that they say, because we're such an online marketplace now, right? And so they're struggling to provide the value, and so you need to challenge them and say, well, what added value, what is that added channel, the added sales that they're presenting that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise?
Yeah, and you can actually push some of your supply chain operations to them, like packaging.
Yep.
And other things that you wouldn't have thought about doing, having another party do it, but there are value-added activities that distributors are looking to do for their clients.
Okay. It's on packaging that we'll get to in a moment as well. The last question in the Q&A portion it might be tough to answer. What's the investment to implement a cost reduction pipeline, and when can we expect to see the results?
Okay. So I can start with that, Lisa, and then please chime in. So it's a tough question to answer because the investment is based on where you are in your supply chain today, right? So remember what I talked about, transformation phase versus cost versus continuous improvement. If you're in a transformation phase, you're going to have a bigger investment than if you've done a lot of the transformation work and now you're in the continuous improvement. And the payback is really important. The payback is not something you're going to get in 10 days, 15 days, or 30 days. The payback is really usually seen over the course of 6 months to a year. Therefore, it's really important for the CFO and the finance organization to be part of the equation and part of the understanding that this isn't overnight initiative. So these are fundamental things about these are fundamental things that a company does that you're rethinking, that you need to do differently. So therefore it takes time, and using the agile approach will definitely get you much quicker results. But you typically would compare savings year over year. Last year I paid $5 for this product, and this year I'm paying $4.50. So I've had a savings of 50 cents, but until you actually consume the inventory that you bought at $5 and you start buying it at $4.50, that's when you're going to start to realize the benefits. That's an example of how you realize the benefits of some of these cost savings. So, but you're going to have, if you think about it, it's a funnel, right? You're going to have cost savings that take longer, then you're going to have cost savings that take less time, but they're going to be mixed and they're going to be coming through. And you got to make sure that you're measuring them in that same way as you're setting up the scorecard for the cost savings pipeline on the other side, and helping organization understand what you're going to see in 3 months, what you're going to see in 6 months, and what you're going to see in 12 months. What I like to do is I like to think about cost reduction pipeline as the same way as a sales pipeline. If I want to go after $20 million of cost savings, I got to have a pipeline of at least 45 to 50 million, because some of that may not come through. Some of it may have leakage and so on. And then I got to be able to promise the organization, how long is it going to take for you to see that 20 million? How much of it you're going to see this year? How much are you going to see next year? How much are you going to see the year after? Because many, like for example, when you're doing a footprint consolidation, you're consolidating factories. that impacts 2 to 3 years out. Doesn't mean you don't see anything immediately, but you see results for a couple of years as a result of that investment that you've made. Is anything else?
Yeah, and I would just say really need, again, to partner with the finance organization and the overall organization, because the investment, depending on what you're changing and transforming, the investment comes in different ways. And it may be infrastructure, it may be systems, it may be equipment, it may be facilities. And I mean, you've got to work together as a whole organization and prioritize based on the needs of the organization and where it takes money, right, to make the investment. And so your finance, your CFO can help you determine, maybe you think, hey, I want to do this first, but it may actually be, let's do that third because we need to do X, Y first before you can do that.
And sometimes many of these cost reduction items will pay for other investment, longer term investment that you need as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you. I know we're getting close on time. We've got one statement and one more question if we can do that.
Sure.
Mr. Hogg kind of goes back to what Lisa was talking about. Packaging can have such a huge impact on transportation costs, but most packaging experts have no formal training on how their decisions impact transportation costs. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's a very true statement. And one of my past roles was global transportation, and it's not like there's in the past, so you can go to university and go, oh, I'm going to become certified in transportation. But it's so true, because there's so many expenses in transportation, from the packaging, from the routing, from the carrier. But carriers have all kinds of data. And you can work with the carriers because they want your business, right? So you can just sit down, spend some time with them and ask for some of the data analytics. They know where your packages are going. Even if you're not using that carrier right now, you can give them the ship tos and let them run some analysis for you. Leverage them. That's for free, because that's their sales process. Ask them about the routing. Ask them about the packaging. Should it be corrugated? Should it be bubbles, wraps? What should it be? They're going to help you a lot, and it's no cost for that advice.
Great, thank you. And the last one's for Seema. Can you please repeat the costs involved in making a sale?
Costs involved making a sale. I'm not sure I follow the question. In terms of when you're, if you're making a sale to a customer. So for example, when you make a sale to a customer, there are many costs that are involved. There's product cost, there's service cost, there's cost of any special arrangements that you might make in terms of distribution or customization. There's sales and marketing support that you can give to a customer. So there's lots of different costs that come into play when you're making a sale beyond just the product cost itself. I think as salespeople, when we're out there and we're talking about any sort of special arrangement, just remember that equates to dollar signs in terms of your cost. And that could be in any sort of incentives that you're providing. So for example, if you're providing a customer an incentive of, we give a 30-day terms, collection terms, right? We'll give you 45 days. Well, guess what? You might just think, well, we just at 2 weeks extra that the customer can take to pay us. But that right there just impacted your overall cost tremendously. So that's what I mean about cost of sale. Cost of sale is a lot more than just the product or the unit price that you're charging from the customer.
Okay.
I hope that answers the question.
That's all of our questions. Great presentation, Seema. Lisa did a great job, informative as always. Thank you so much. If anyone on the webinar has any questions, reach out to AZMEP. If we'd like to get connected with Seema or Lisa, we can help you do that as well.
Yeah, and we look forward to next week talking about reshoring. So thank you guys.
Join us next week. Thank you. Have a great day. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.